Insomniac Games was expanding. What was once a small studio of just a few developers had grown into an enormous independent company that churned out hit after hit with over 170 people employed. With the growth of the company, Insomniac found that they were able to develop 2 titles at once, entering the PS3 era with both Ratchet & Clank continuing along with new franchise Resistance. However, with Insomniac located on the west coast of the United States, in Burbank, California, they sought to find a way to recruit potential developers on the East Coast without becoming too big to handle. Thus, in 2008, in the midst of the development of Resistance 2 and Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time, a decision was made. Insomniac Games would be opening a second studio. The location? North Carolina. The Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina was already known for its support of tech companies, not to mention its colleges like Duke University, and its prime location on the East Coast made for the right candidate for Insomniac's second studio, also to be simply known as Insomniac Games. Chad Dezern, an art director at Insomniac, would be promoted to studio director and move out to the new studio, while Sean McCabe, who along with Chad was finishing up work on Resistance 2, would serve as production director. Insomniac's Burbank office would remain the larger of the two, with a team of 25 to 30 designers and artists working in North Carolina to develop one title at a time, as well as receiving support from Burbank and vice versa. The idea was to maintain a feeling of a small studio within Insomniac at large, creating new AAA game titles and not just being a support studio. The new location would open early the next year, in January 2009. At the conclusion of Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time, Insomniac believed themselves to be done with the Lombax and Robot. However, when the game released to such critical and commercial success, Sony was quick to request for a new Ratchet title to be developed. While development in Burbank would continue with the Resistance franchise, along with new ventures like Outer Knots for mobile devices and Fuse for both the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, the new team in Durham would be tasked with developing the next Ratchet title. With 3 story-based games released in the last 3 years, however, in order to keep the franchise fresh after now 7 entries, it was time to experiment. The adapt or die mentality was back more than ever. Various ideas were thrown around to shake up the Ratchet & Clank formula, but one that really stood out to the new team was cooperative play. The series had previously dabbled in co-op action with Ratchet Deadlocked on the PlayStation 2, but the new idea here was more ambitious, a full-length Ratchet & Clank adventure with up to 4 players at once. With this choice, a lot would have to be modified to make this concept work. For one, with 4 characters on screen at once, a new camera system that was more overhead would have to be implemented, opting to avoid a split-screen setup like in Deadlocked. Because of the camera being pulled farther back, the art direction and design of the Ratchet universe would see its first truly major overhaul. Leaning into a more cartoony aesthetic than past games, Ratchet's head was made larger, Clank was made bigger, now being about half Ratchet's height, Quark's proportions would be adjusted, and Nefarious would be made smaller, more comparable to Ratchet's height instead of being typically double his size. Oh, did I mention Dr. Nefarious? Well, after collapsing on his own space station right before it exploded in a spectacular fashion, the iconic villain was dead. Super dead. Well, until he wasn't.
Never ring a bell if there's even a slight chance that the publisher might want it unrung. Chad Dezern and Sean McCabe pitched the new Ratchet game to Sony, and one key piece of feedback they received was to make Dr. Nefarious a playable character. We just flew that dude into a space station, and Greg Phillips from Sony was like, maybe it was just a flesh wound?
Nefarious was a fan favorite and Sony wanted him back, so Insomniac had to find a way to un-annihilate him. Nefarious' fate was retconned into Lawrence teleporting his unconscious body off the station before it exploded, ensuring his survival. Simple enough. With finding a concept that would fit a game involving 4-player co-op, along with giving a logical reason as to why Nefarious would be working with his 3 thorns in his metallic side, Insomniac would revisit the one-planet concept first explored in the shelved Ratchet & Clank Nexus, before it was turned into Ratchet Deadlocked, stranding their heroes and villain on one planet for the primary duration of the game and forcing them to work together was the most logical way to bring the gameplay and story concepts together. The new title was given the name Ratchet & Clank All for One, in reference to its emphasis on 4-player cooperative gameplay. Not as much of an innuendo as previous game titles, though it's been noted other titles that were denied by Sony were 4-play, bros before foes, and multiple organisms. Yeah. The story goes that after Captain Quark has become the new galactic president,
she was taking a memo.
Nefarious hatches a scheme to ruin his tenure in office by unleashing a monster upon the city of Luminopolis. However, this creature brings to attention a creature collector machine named Ephemeris, who captures the creature along with Ratchet and company in tow. The four end up on the planet Magnus, and, with the help of a little alien girl named Susie, they have to work together to get back home and destroy Ephemeris in the process. The group soon finds out that a creature known as the Loki Master is in control of the Ephemeris, and it's taking control of an innocent creature known as Mr. Dinkles to stop Ratchet and friends from destroying it. They also meet Dr. Frumpus Croyd, who aids in their defeat of the Loki Master along with his old friend Nevo Binkelmeyer. Now, with the group in control of Ephemeris, they use the machine to return back to Luminopolis for the crisis averted. The story was definitely more slight and straightforward than previous Ratchet titles, but then the focus was less on cinematic storytelling a la the Future Trilogy and more on providing new, unique gameplay for the series, along with a stronger family-friendly focus. And this spin-off experiment largely worked. The game sold well, over 1 million copies when it released in 2011 for the PlayStation 3, and it was also critically well received, though it held the lowest scores of the Ratchet series thus far. The co-op gameplay variety was praised, though criticisms were directed at the more family-friendly tone of the story, along with issues with glitches, awkward partner AI, and easy puzzles. Not exactly a home run for Insomniac, but they pressed onward, committed to experimenting even further with the Ratchet formula. It was notable as well that All For One marked the series' first foray into 3D, with the title being the first in the series to be compatible with the then popular 3D television sets. The year 2012 was the 10th anniversary for Ratchet & Clank as a series, an incredible milestone, especially for a game franchise with now 10 titles, including portable spin-offs, under its tricked-out belt. 2 new game releases would be put out for the 10th anniversary, with the first being the next title from Insomniac's North Carolina studio, Ratchet & Clank Full Frontal Assault. Taking direct influence from the broader battle environments created in A Crack in Time, along with Ratchet's then new ability to speed around on a pair of hover boots, a new gameplay style for the series was crafted based in the tower defense genre, where a player has a base that has to be upgraded with various defensive forces in order to protect it from oncoming assaults of enemies. While this gameplay concept wasn't exactly new for Insomniac, as it was reminiscent of Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal's popular Siege multiplayer mode, centering a whole game around tower defense was entirely new. Full Frontal Assault would also mark the first time Ratchet & Clank would appear on Sony's newest handheld and PlayStation Portable successor, the underrated PlayStation Vita. Being part of Sony's cross-buy program, if consumers purchased Full Frontal Assault for the PlayStation 3, they'd also receive a free digital copy of the game for the Vita. Moment-to-moment gameplay would see return to the typical third-person perspective of previous Ratchet titles, though co-op play would still be featured for up to 2 players. While releasing to mark a celebration of the series' 10th anniversary, Full Frontal Assault was built as a smaller game at a lower price point, consisting of just 5 battlefield levels across 3 different planets. Players would zip around these environments as Ratchet, collecting bolts and weaponry to defend a central base held by the Q-Force, made up of Ratchet, Clank, and Captain Quark. Claiming different areas of the map, players would then have to prep their own camp with turrets, shields, and other means of defense before a final assault of robotic enemies and the like would come to take down the base. If this final force was fended off, the level would be complete and the cycle would start anew on a different battlefield. It would also be notable as the first Ratchet & Clank game to receive downloadable add-on content, including various skin packs to modify the visual look of the characters. New maps, like one based on the city of Metropolis, were added as well with free patches to the main game along with new modes for multiplayer. While a smaller game in comparison to previous Ratchet titles, Full Frontal Assault did feature a story, telling a simple tale of a Quark fanboy previously seen in Going Commando.
Cool. Mwah. I'm taking the captain home before the humidity gets to him.
Feeling that the hero had failed and ended up as a disappointment to his fanbase. The ex-fanboy named Stuart Zergo then pledges to defeat Quark, proving how pathetic he really was to the galaxy. I mean, while Stuart wasn't wrong, he enacts his plan by attempting to take out planetary defense centers across the galaxy, so Ratchet and the Q-Force have to put a stop to it. Eventually, the group finally discovers Stuart's location and defeats him, making the galaxy safe again for everyone. A straightforward narrative that unfortunately lacked the solid buddy cop dynamic of previous titles. The concept and gameplay for Full Frontal Assault was a distinct spin on the Ratchet formula, but the game would prove to be unfortunately the weakest received entry yet. While reviews weren't Bad, per se, they all tended to be more mixed than anything. The innovation of gameplay was praised overall, but the single-player gameplay was criticized as being lackluster on its own, and not particularly interesting. It seemed to many like a dilution of the franchise, with it losing its distinct qualities that made it interesting and just feeling like an unremarkable third-person shooter. The multiplayer was praised as much more enjoyable and where the game really stood out, but it wasn't enough to save the overall reception. The vision was there, just a lot of missed potential with fully utilizing tower defense as a genre within the Ratchet framework. The Vita version was also criticized for having various technical issues and long load times. It didn't help either that the Vita version was delayed past the PS3 release and was released a few months later in 2013 instead of in 2012 at the same time as the home console version. Now, the other title released in 2012 for the 10th anniversary was the Ratchet & Clank Collection for the PlayStation 3. Following the trend of remastering and re-releasing PlayStation 2 titles on the PS3 like the Sly Collection and God of War Collection, the Ratchet & Clank Collection took the series' original 3 games, Ratchet & Clank, Going Commando, and Up Your Arsenal, and made them playable on the HD console with newly remastered widescreen visuals, so players could relive the original classic entries in the series. The collection would not be developed by Insomniac, however. Instead, it would be outsourced to developer Idle Minds, known for working on such games as Pain, Madagascar Escape to Africa, and Neopets The Darkest Fairy. Not only would the original 3 Ratchet games be playable in high definition, they'd also be made compatible to play on 3D TVs, albeit at a lower frame rate. Up Your Arsenal's multiplayer was also included, though only playable offline. The collection would also see a release on the PlayStation Vita as a downloadable title. Insomniac's games held up remarkably well, and reviews and sales were universally solid for the collection. Ratchet & Clank had a long legacy in its 10 years of existence, and seeing where it all began served as a satisfying way to celebrate its anniversary. Ratchet Deadlock would not be included in the initial collection, but would later be added as a downloadable title on the PlayStation Network, along with being given free to those who had purchased the PS3 version of Full Frontal Assault as an apology for the delay of the Vita version of the game. All for One and Full Frontal Assault were major experiments for the Ratchet & Clank series and the new team in North Carolina, and it showed that these beloved characters could still find ways to reinvent themselves, even if results would vary. The next game in the series, releasing just a year after Full Frontal Assault in 2013, would see a return to the Ratchet & Clank gameplay beloved by fans around the world. However, while the return to the classic gameplay was a welcome one, it would still just be a half step instead of the full leap back into the big, epic adventures last seen in A Crack in Time. Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus, not to be confused with the cancelled Ratchet & Clank Nexus project, would serve as an epilogue to the future trilogy of games and for the Ratchet series as a whole on the PlayStation 3. Built as a smaller game, Into the Nexus was designed to bring back the classic Ratchet gameplay, but with new ways of traversal along with a moodier, somewhat spookier tone, as the duo traversed a section of the galaxy that was said to be haunted. The game's story begins with Ratchet & Clank, along with Kronk and Zephyr, piloting a large prison ship as they transport criminal Vendra Prague to a detention center. During their journey, they awaken Vendra from cryosleep just as the ship's gravity systems fail, allowing her to wreak havoc. They eventually restrain Vendra, only for her giant twin brother, Neft in Prague, to arrive and free her. Explosives on the prison ship are detonated, and Ratchet and Clank only just escape, though Kronk and Zephyr are sadly lost in the chaos and go down with the ship. Landing on a planet in the haunted section of the galaxy, Ratchet contacts Talwyn to inform her of her robot's friend's demises. She pleads for Ratchet to return to her so she doesn't lose anyone else.
Clank and I are going to stop them before they hurt anyone else.
Listen to me. Come back to Meridian City.
Tal...
Please. You and Clank. You're all I have left now.
But they vow to recapture the Prague twins before they can do more harm. While exploring the planet Yerrick, Ratchet and Clank soon find that the area isn't really haunted, but is instead the homes of spirit-like creatures called Nethers, who have arrived in their dimension through various Nether rifts. They also learn that Vendra and Nefton had built their own version of the Dimensionator to bring the Nethers over to this galaxy, hoping that the Nether leader, known as Mr. I, would help reunite them with their race, not unlike Ratchet's search for the Lombaxes. Unfortunately, however, Mr. I instead imprisons Vendra in the Netherverse, an in-between dimensional world. Ratchet and Clank strike a deal with Nefton. If they help free Vendra by retrieving the original Dimensionator, the twins have to turn themselves in. As they obtain the original device, Mr. I attacks, leading to Ratchet fighting the Nether leader while Clank traverses the Netherverse to find and free Vendra. They both succeed. Ratchet defeats Mr. I, and with Clank saving Vendra, the group works together to send the Nethers back to their own dimension permanently. In the ensuing chaos, the Dimensionator is broken. Clank expresses regret with Ratchet unable to use the device device to find the Lombaxes. But Ratchet admits that he's finally accepted his lot in life and is happy with the family he has now in Clank and Talwyn. The duo depart, only for Clank to grab the Dimensionaire himself when no one's looking. Into the Nexus was well received upon its release, selling well and reviewing better than All for One and Full Frontal Assault, though still lower than previous Ratchet titles like the Future Trilogy. While audiences praised the return to form for the gameplay, eschewing the gimmicky mechanics of previous titles, critics were more lukewarm on the shorter length of the game. Consisting of just 4 planets, Into the Nexus was about half as long as the typical Ratchet & Clank adventure, and the cheaper price point upon release reflected that, throwing in a free digital code for Quest for Booty as well to sweeten the deal. The game was short, yes, but the story was very well received, serving as a lovely coda to the epic story that concluded in a crack in time, while leaving things open to continue down the line. Also praised was the gameplay variety, as solo Clank missions saw return in charming, gravity-switching side-scrolling segments as the little robot traversed the Netherverse, while Ratchet received new tools to move around environments, like new gravity-manipulating puzzles along with more open environments to travel around using a jetpack. So, while things weren't universally positive, Into the Nexus was largely seen as a step in the right direction for the Ratchet & Clank series. A Vita port was also considered for the game, but after the struggles with putting Full Frontal Assault on the platform, the idea was quickly abandoned. There was also the case of the new PlayStation 4 console arriving on store shelves that same year in 2013. Insomniac considered a port to the new system for Into the Nexus, as the game's performance on the PS3 with frame rate was inconsistent at best, a lower watermark for a series known for silky smooth gameplay. Unfortunately, however, Insomniac's engine for the PS3 didn't translate cleanly to the new Sony console. If Insomniac was to put a Ratchet title on the PS4, it would have to be something new. Well, sort of new. Ratchet & Clank's time on the PlayStation 3 was one of peaks and valleys. With 6 titles in total released, 2 more than when the series was on the PlayStation 2, there was a lot of content to go around, and to avoid franchise fatigue, a lot of experimentation. Some paid off better than others, but at this point it was typical Insomniac to take their existing characters and try new things with them and see what worked. While some titles were less well received than normal, Insomniac and its new studio in North Carolina continued the storied legacy of the franchise and took it in new exciting directions, from strong cinematic storytelling to finding new cooperative ways of play. In the end, what worked all came down to its characters. Ratchet & Clank's friendship was the anchor for every entry in the series, and the more focus placed on the beloved duo, it seemed the better the game. After now over 10 years of Ratchet & Clank, Insomniac now knew what worked and what didn't, and still strived to take these beloved characters to interesting new places in both gameplay and story. Adapt or die was the mantra, and this era of Ratchet & Clank was emblematic of that. Insomniac embraced the unknown no matter what it brought, while trying to evolve and remembering what made their games so great. Experimentation with something so beloved can be scary, but it was essential to maintain a series as long-running as Ratchet & Clank. And speaking of the unknown, it was time for Ratchet & Clank to embrace a new medium entirely. Hollywood was knocking, and the Lombax and Robot were not only heading towards a new console, but they were going to the big screen.